Okay, that last reading, uh, it it really kind of intimidates a lot of people. Not because it's too much for them to comprehend, but let's face it. I mean, a lot of people kind of cringe when they think of reading the Bible from cover to cover because they kind of have this feeling within themselves that it's really, really long and boring because of readings like that. Um, they don't really see the significance of things like genealogies. But it's not, it really it isn't boring if you really look closely at them. Um, let's backtrack a little bit and talk about the beginning of these genealogies, the beginning of that reading where Eve had relations, or Adam had relations with his wife Eve, and she bore a son named Cain, saying, "I have produced another man with the help of the Lord." Um, it was Eve who bore Cain, not Adam, first of all. And as we read through these genealogies, talking about, it says the men begot these sons or had sons and daughters. Um, it really was the women that had them, but the women are implied, and it's kind of for the women to be implied, I suppose, from the culture which this is coming from, and probably even from the culture from which you're coming. For the women to be implied is really kind of putting them on a pedestal, especially when um, that impliement can be insinuated by it saying that in the first mention of the first um, birth, it said Eve gave birth to Cain, and then she bore Abel. Well, it might be seen that Cain and Abel were actually twins because it doesn't say Adam had relations with his wife Eve again and bore Abel like it does with Seth. Um, the reason I'm saying these things is because it's really kind of important to, when reading through the Bible, you want to sort of contemplate and you want to sort of establish relations with God Himself so that you can read a passage of Scripture, pray about it, and find out what God is saying to you directly, either about your own personal life or about general statements that can be made and can be interpreted from these Scriptures. God gives us these Scriptures so that we can form a personal relationship with Him, not for us to know history or even to know morality through the Scriptures. I mean, the Scriptures are beneficial for teaching and even reproof, but what they're really intended for is so that we can know God on a personal level and have our first real encounter with God through, it's sort of like coming together with God in these Scriptures so that He can speak to us. So what God says, to me, and you can provide your own input on what God says to you in these Scriptures. But when Cain and Abel offered their sacrifices, I don't believe that God accepted Abel's sacrifice because it was an animal sacrifice. When Cain's sacrifice was rejected, God said, "If you do well, you can hold your head up. But if not, then sin crouches at the doorway, and its desire is toward you, yet you can be its master." So there was something about Cain's sacrifice that was not well. The sacrifice was not offered well. Um, and so for God to accept it would be pointless because it would be futile. A sacrifice not offered correctly or not offered rightly isn't really sacred at all. Um, what I can see in the sacrifice is that it was really a single sacrifice. Cain brought the fruits of his field, and Abel, for his part, brought the firstlings of his flock. But it was really the two of them coming together. And God probably knew what was in Cain's heart, and Cain probably did not see his sacrifice as being offered with Abel's sacrifice, but rather as something separate. And when God accepted Abel's part of it, but Cain's part of it he didn't, Cain became very crestfallen and very resentful toward his brother, which God knew would happen. Well, what God also knew would happen, because he's God, is that Cain would kill his brother Abel. Now, when Cain killed his brother Abel and God confronted him about it, Cain automatically assumed himself to be cast out of God's presence, because God basically took away his vocation of being a tiller of the soil, saying that the land will no longer produce its yield, and Cain would have to find something else to do. Well, Cain did evidently find something else to do, and he was very successful, because he was able to build a city, and his children were able to basically develop new skills for humanity. You know, it's just like reading the scriptures and seeing things like this, these details, is really important, because every word of the Bible is important. Nothing really ought to be overlooked, even though, you know, our minds can only hold so much, and we will overlook things, and that's why many people read the Bible over and over again. But God actually granted Cain, it could actually be seen as a blessing, him being cast out of God's presence. Well, that's something Cain did. That's not something God said. God did not cast Cain out of his presence. Cain cast himself out of God's presence for some reason. Well, that reason could have been that Cain, again, was ashamed of his sin and suffered that shame. And so God alleviated his toil by giving him the ability to develop a metropolitan life, where he would be something higher up, maybe the king of the city he built, and people would serve him. All the while he endured the suffering of the shame he endured from killing his brother. Perhaps even the nation of Seth that came later had resentment toward Cain, and there was, Cain and his descendants may have been ostracized. Another thing to look at in these genealogies is that in the genealogy of Cain, it doesn't say how long those people lived. Doesn't even say that they died. So all of them may have actually been alive during the flood. Did they die in the flood? Well, most likely they did. But, and of course I haven't mentioned the flood yet in the readings, but that's going to come soon. It doesn't talk about how old they were when they gave birth to their sons. It doesn't talk about how old they were when they died. So that information is not provided, and it's not provided for a reason, because the genealogies of Seth, it really emphasizes that these people aged. They aged many, many years, and as long as they lived, they still died. I mean, as many centuries that they lived, it didn't matter how much longevity they had, even up to 900 and some odd years, almost a millennium, they still died. And this was the nation of Seth, which could be perceived as a righteous nation, the nation that was going to replace Abel. Cain's nation is just sort of there, but it's mentioned, it's not forgotten. So that's important, because how is the son of Cain, or the son of Enoch, the son of Enoch, or his son Irad, how is that relevant to our lives? Why do we need to know that Cain had a son named Enoch? Why did we need to know that Enoch had a son named Irad? I'm just going to put these questions out there. It's not necessary for me to answer questions like that at this point. I want you to start thinking critically about what you're reading in the Bible, and really pay attention to what's in there. And I suppose these sort of little mentionings are kind of a way for you to keep your eyes peeled for wonderful jewels of insight that you can excavate from these seemingly long and boring passages that most people actually overlook. And if you do that, you will definitely be head and shoulders above even people that have read the Bible many, many times, and still their perception of God is very convoluted and even a contradiction to the very gospel of Jesus Christ that we hold so dear as Christians. That's all I have to say about those two chapters. So tune into the next video, and I will read the next few chapters of Genesis. Thank you very much. God bless you.